Greetings, mabuhay. I am Tyron Jan Nepomuceno. I am a faculty member of the University of Santo Tomas Senior High School. I am a graduate of AB Asian Studies and of Master of Arts in History. I am currently taking up my doctorate in history from the same university. I am also concurrently serving as the Community Development Coordinator of the UST Senior High School. For the 11th Conference on Religion and Spirituality in Society, I want to share one of my researches to all of you. Let me share my screen. My work is entitled Apostles of Salamanca, Adherents of Thomism, the Dominican Salazar and Benavides as the earliest human rights advocates in the Philippines. Both Dominicans, both served as Manila archbishops during the 16th century. Both fought for human rights, even when that concept wasn't inculcated or even invented yet during the time. Social justice is a concept without an exact definition, but can be understood by attributing various acts of amicability and goodwill towards another and the larger community. It is a concept that requires the well-being of each and every individual in society, enjoying their rights mandated either by the laws of nature or that of man. It is conditioned by both time and geography. For during the time of the ancients, in the Greek tradition, Plato being one of the known philosophers to imply it in his teachings, equated social justice with human well-being in his magnum opus, Republic. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, added that it is regulated by law, especially in terms of allocation and distribution of benefits. Hobbes, in presenting his idea of the state of Leviathan, emphasized the need for an external authority to ensure a just society for all. It is therefore fitting to say that social justice is an evolving concept which assumes additional character and usage as the narrative of human history progresses, and the diversifying character of human experience becomes clear. It is synonymous to fairness and equality in treatment and chances of opportunity nonetheless, but no exact definition was given to it. It could be as complex as the behavior of man and the lived experiences of societies that desired it. Social justice, being a universal principle and a desire coveted by man all throughout history, will truly be expressed in various philosophical traditions. This study will look into the messages of social justice in the teachings of the Salamanca School and its major shaper, Thomistic philosophy, and how these were exemplified by the earliest defenders of human rights in the Philippines, the Spaniards Domingo de Salazar and Miguel de Benavides, who are both Dominican missionaries and became archbishops of Manila. The research questions are the following. First, what is the Salamanca School? What important principles emerged from it that contributed to the concept of social justice and human rights? Second, what Thomistic principles contributed to the formation of people becoming advocates of social justice and human rights? Third, how did the Dominican Salamanca Thomistic notion of social justice reach the Philippine shores? Fourth, how did the two Dominican archbishops of Manila, Domingo de Salazar and Miguel de Benavides, actualize the principles they have inherited from the Salamanca Thomistic tradition in light of the fight for social justice and human rights? Lastly, what kind of legacy did Salazar and Benavides leave behind? For this study, I used as framework phenomenology. Heidegger, in his 1927 magnum opus, Being and Time, stated that we and our activities are always in the world. Our, our being is being in the world. So we do not study our activities by bracketing the world. Rather, we interpret our activities and the meanings things have for us by looking to our contextual relations to things in the world. Heidegger viewed humans as being primarily concerned creatures with an emphasis on their fate in an alien world. He also believed that consciousness is not separate from the world, but is a formation of historically lived experiences. Thus, our understanding is not how the world is known by the individual, but reflects what the individual is. Heidegger expressed the view of people and the world as inextricably connected in social, cultural, and historical contexts. Heidegger believes that all understanding is linked to a particular force structure in which historicality plays a very important role. Therefore, a person needs to become aware of the interpretive influences. This same process focuses on historical meanings of experience, their development, and cumulative effects on individual and social levels. So in this case, in this particular study, we will be examining the experiences, the lived experiences of Benavides and of course, Domingo de Salazar in the Salamanca School and other experiences that shaped their personalities, that shaped their ideologies relating to social justice and human rights. Of course, their environment, their studies under the Dominicans, their training, and even their religion form their personality and ideologies. For the methodology, I used descriptive analytic method. This study uses the descriptive analytical method, for it is the very nature of history as a discipline. In order to operationalize such method, an interplay of the primary and secondary sources must be carefully done. The historian, after collecting his data, will interpret it. Scott Gordon wrote that the historian must go beyond the specific empirical evidence revealed through examination of documents and statistics. He must study the general culture of the time and place, its literature, art, language, etc., in order to arrive at an understanding of what life was like, how people thought, their hopes and fears, their conception of themselves, their society, and the world. Only by such means can a historian that belongs to one culture give an accurate and penetrating account of events that took place in another. So in this case, we will be revisiting the late 15th and the early 16th centuries in order to examine the lives of Domingo de Salazar and Miguel de Benavides. So when we talk about the Salamanca School, their earliest influence, the Salamanca School is a movement of diversified intellectual traditions based in the University of Salamanca, the oldest educational institution in the Iberian Peninsula. It was in 1244 that the Dominicans came there, and they obtained eventually in 1489 the right to confer degrees. Known to be one of the foremost figures of the Salamanca School is Francisco de Vitoria of the Order of Preachers, a Dominican, who we know now as the father of international law. In the Salamanca School, there were disputations on the different themes of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica. And of course, they were not limited to theology and philosophy. They even discussed their social issues, political, even economic issues. They even talked about the actions of Spain in the New World and its quest to expand its empire. When talking about the Salamanca School, we can always also revisit Antonio de Montesinos' homily, which was delivered in present-day Dominican Republic and Haiti. His homily is a reflection of the Salamanca school of thought. He emphasized in that homily in the New World. In December 21, 1511, on December 21, 1511, he emphasized this: Spanish oppressors are living and will die in a state of mortal sin because of what they are doing at that time with the natives. So what are the important lessons of Salamanca? First, the Pope and King are not masters of the world. The Salamanca school rejected forced conversions. They emphasized the idea that discovery is not a justification for conquest. They also emphasized that sins of lack of awareness of morals are not justifications to conquer people. For example, the natives who are not aware that they are committing these mistakes, these immoralities, these are not excuse for them to be colonized. They also emphasized the idea of a just war, wherein it should be defensive in nature. It should not be waged because of difference in religion or to purposely expand territories. The Salamanca school also, we must take note, emphasized the freedom to evangelize and the protection of persons and properties in the colonies, native or foreign. It is important to note that one of the compelling influences in the Salamanca school is, of course, the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay. So many students there, scholars, thinkers, have been debating and commenting on the different principles being introduced by Aquinas in his writings, in his different writings, the Summa Theologica, the Summa Contra Gentiles, for example. But let us discuss what principles of Thomistic thought are related to the principles of social justice and human rights. So I found these three things as directly connected, coming in his Summa Theologica, the principle of synderesis. First, is an ethical, it is a principle wherein it states that people have an innate knowledge and understanding of what is good and bad. There are ethical principles innate in every human person. So if that is the case, then therefore all human beings have what we call dignity. And therefore they have the right to be respected at all times. Aquinas' world and his lived experiences of it formed his writing style and philosophy. Aquinas lived during the Middle Ages, which was characterized with both political and intellectual upheavals, the diversity of ideas opening the doors to Aristotelian and Arabic logic, and the cosmopolitan character of society, where indeed the diversity that is to come in the upcoming Renaissance is being born at this time. It was a Europe which was under one church with the presence of the so-called heretical groups, with the Inquisition that pushed them on check, the active ministry of valiant religious orders preserving the church's traditions, including Aquinas' own order of preachers, founded by Dominic de Guzman. The strong image of the Holy Roman Empire vis-a-vis other empires of Asiatic nature, and the influence of local lords, including that of his own father. There was indeed an image of competition between the church and the secular empire, even of scholastic traditions and of cultures in general. Aquinas was a part of a scholastic tradition where writing commentaries, especially on influential and conflicting ideas, which are observable in his disputations. In all these scenarios, Aquinas became the champion of using Aristotelian logic in order to strengthen the point of faith. During his time, Aquinas, due to his chosen approach, was considered a heterodox thinker by the champions of traditionalism. It led Chesterton in his work on Aquinas entitled Thomas Aquinas, the dumb ox, to comment that it is the paradox of history that each generation is converted by the saint who contradicts it the most. Aquinas indeed Christianized Aristotle's ideas and used his methodology to strengthen his point. He respected difference and loved diversity, but it all redounded to one point: God, the Alpha and the Omega. He directed every idea towards a common end, to the divine. True to the nature of philosophy as either a reflection of the times and a reaction desiring to maintain or reform it, Aquinas' ideas also address various topics that would touch on the collectivity of the human experience. As suggested, his time was one of upheaval, and a discourse on the human person would naturally emerge in search for answers and solutions to the difficulties man faced. Aquinas presented the Western world with vast ideas on the area of human flourishing, ethics, the notion of reality or nature of things, metaphysics, as well as his overall view of the human person or philosophical anthropology. For this study, which desires to unravel the embedded ideas of social justice in a Thomistic tradition, concepts from the Summa Theologica, as I've said a while ago, synderesis, and of course, love and justice will be utilized. In establishing Thomism's take on the principles of social justice, it is necessary to point out its view on the human person. The human person is a composite of the material and immaterial principles that is matter and form, respectively. The human person is more than just his body, described by Aquinas as his matter. For it is only a part of his entirety which includes his soul, described by Aquinas as man's form. This composition forms man's nature and wholeness, which is rational. Man, being rational, is directed towards a greater and ultimate purpose. Man's rational nature is one that he shares in one way or another with God, for man is created by God. Man's rational nature, according to Aquinas, is God's imprint on man. God is man's beatitude, the reason and basis for his existence, happiness, and satisfaction. Man's ultimate purpose is happiness, but in a theological sense, beatitude. For the human person to achieve his ultimate purpose, exercising virtues is a necessity. A life lived in virtues empowers the human person to achieve excellence. That is a life dedicated to the pursuit of what is good. I've mentioned to you a while ago the principle of synderesis. Now let us focus on the second principle, love. Thomas Aquinas, regarded to be the angelic doctor, in addressing the concept of love, pointed out that in loving, it is necessary to know the one you love and reach a point of connaturalness, where the one who loves and the one being loved becomes identical. They become one. Truly, one cannot love something or someone strange for him. Aquinas also emphasized that desiring the good of the object of love should be its goal. In loving, the one who loves identifies with the one being loved as established by Aquinas using the principle of connaturalness, that is, reaching the point of belongingness or even becoming one and the same. Aquinas is not alone in viewing love in this sense. Saint Clare of Assisi puts it, we become what we love, and who we love shapes what we become. Love transforms the lover in a sense that he desires the one he loves to be with him and in him to the point of them becoming one. All men who desire something which will become a part of them would naturally desire the good or satisfaction of the one being loved. As the Holy Scriptures reveals to us in 1 John 4, verse 16, whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. Love is desiring the good of others and is ultimately directed towards God, who loved man first. Loving becomes our identity and is an affirmation of our belongingness with Christ. Truly, The good is always the efficient and the final cause of love, as explained by Aquinas. So that is his notion of love pertaining to human persons, of course. The third principle is on justice. Justice is a quality of human social relations. This is demonstrated mainly by rendering one person what is his or her due. Both Aristotle and St. Thomas consider justice important as it underscores human nature not just as rational but also relational. Our abilities to fulfill who we are and to achieve our purpose are to a great degree dependent on the kind of human relations we can foster. St. Thomas does not view a human person as self-sufficient, but one that is characterized by his or her unique nature to need others and be needed by them. In this context of interdependence, it is important that one renders what properly belongs to another. So synderesis, love, and justice, in the view of the researcher, are the three principles that influenced the Salamanca school and even Benavides and Salazar in their quest for human rights. Regarded to be as one of the greatest victories of the Salamanca school is when Pope Paul III issued the bull Sublimis Deus. It was highly influenced by one of the products of the Salamanca school, Bartolome de las Casas, the apostle to the Indians. Okay? Because the Sublimis Deus and the bull Sublimis Deus emphasized that indigenous peoples are fully human and have rights to their actual possession, contradicting the abusive policies and actions of the Spaniards at that time in the New World. So now the question is, how did this mission, how did the missionaries reach the Philippines in the first place? It all started when the Blessed Mother appeared in Guadalupe, Mexico on December 9, 1531. She appeared to an Aztec native named Juan Diego. What's the connection of the apparition to the coming of the mission and the fight for human rights here in the Philippines, led by Salazar and Benavides? We must take note that the Guadalupe apparition is a manifestation of a marching order from heaven to evangelize and uplift the lives of the natives, especially in the Eastern Hemisphere. For Christianity is a faith for all, not a monopoly of the West or of Europe only. The Blessed Mother asked for a church to be constructed at the site of her apparition to become a place of worship and comfort for those who are afflicted. The apparition was also an affirmation of God's presence in our midst, that He is not a detached God. The Mother of God introduced herself as the Mother of Jesus meaning God saves. And of course, Emmanuel, God is with us. The apparition also served as a continuous call for social justice and equity, because their Mary appeared to a native of very humble beginnings named Juan Diego. And also, she promoted the culture of life. Mary appeared to be showing signs of pregnancy in her apparition, reminding us of the importance of upholding the right to life, human rights. I would like to read directly from the book which narrates the story of her apparition, and with some direct quotations. Her message: "Know, my son, my much beloved, that I am the ever Virgin Mary, Mother of the true God, who is the author of life, the creator of all things, the Lord of heaven and earth, present everywhere. And it is my wish that here there be raised to me a temple in which, as a loving mother, I shall show my tender clemency and the compassion I feel for the natives and for those who love and seek me, for all who implore my protection, who call on me in their labors and afflictions, and in which I shall hear their weeping and their supplications, that I may give them consolation and relief. So this is a manifestation that the Mother of God, the heavens, and of course God himself will always be on the side of the poor, on the side of the oppressed, and in this case, even on the side of the natives. So that apparition became an inspiration for Catholic missionaries from Europe to move further to the Pacific and even reach what we know as Islas, the Filipinas. So this is the map of the Philippines at that time, including Carolinas, including Marianas. Okay. So after the apparition in Mexico, which became an inspiration to various missionary groups, the Augustinians came in 1565, followed by the Franciscans in 1578, the Jesuits in 1581, the Dominicans in 1587, and the Recollects in 1606. Indeed, that apparition inspired religious missionaries to preach and serve. The Dominicans, or the order of preachers, came to be known as the teachers and builders. So they established various educational institutions, including my own university, where I am connected, the University of Santo Tomas. And of course, they also published the first books. For example, this one, the very first published book in the Philippines, the Doctrina Cristiana. It has the different Catholic prayers written in Spanish and Filipino, and even in the Tagalog script. The Dominicans also served as curators and preservers of culture, establishing one of the oldest libraries and museums in Asia. Oldest extant library and museums, to clarify. The Dominicans are also known to be propagators of the Rosary devotion, which led to the Marian devotions in the Philippines under the title Our Lady of the Most Holy Rosary. One is La Naval de Manila, enthroned in Quezon City. And the other one is Our Lady of the Most Holy Rosary of Manaoag, enthroned in the province of Pangasinan. There are also other devotions to Mary as Our Lady of the Most Holy Rosary, of course, under the Dominicans. So now, let's go now to discussing the experiences of Domingo de Salazar here in the Philippines. Domingo de Salazar of the Order of Preachers was a Spanish Dominican friar who served as the first Bishop of Manila. He was known to be the Las Casas of the Philippines because of his fight for the rights of the natives. As Bishop of Manila, he helped establish the cathedral, he helped establish a hospital, and even a college. He also called for the Synod of Manila to clarify different issues and to give justice to the natives who became victims of oppression during the early years of Spanish colonialism in the Philippines. In his old age, almost 80 at that time, he even went back to Spain to talk to the king, to bring to him the cause of the natives, which resulted to the correction of practices in encomiendas and the establishment of new dioceses, to mention some of the reforms. So when talking about the Synod of Manila, let me quote John N. Schumacher in the book Bishop Domingo de Salazar and the Synod of Manila of 1852, an article in a book about the Synod of Manila. The Synod of Manila emphasized these ideas. And of course, Salazar is very responsible for these things. The Synod emphasized that all persons of all races, including pagans, have certain natural rights which cannot be arbitrarily taken away from them by either pope or king. These include the right of property and the right to rule themselves. Second, those who exercise authority over others, be they king, governor, or encomendero, are not to look on their office primarily as privilege, but as an obligation to bring about the common and individual good of those subject to them. Not only any positive injustice done to any person of whatever rank or condition, but also any damage caused by neglect of one's obligations demands restitution to those who have been injured. Next, even if the persons harmed cannot be found to make restitution to them, no one can remain in possession of wealth he has unjustly obtained, but must make restitution in the best way possible under the circumstances. It is the right and duty of the clergy to call attention to abuses against justice and failure to fulfill obligations to the common good, especially of the poor. This is an integral part of their mission to preach the gospel. And lastly, it is not only the right but also the duty of the church to exclude from the body of Christians and to deny her sacraments to those who refuse to fulfill their obligations in justice, no matter what position in society they may hold. So it is clear that the Synod of Manila, held by Domingo de Salazar, was directly a reflection of the training and what Salazar has learned in the School of Salamanca. Of course, influenced also by Thomism, Salamanca being influenced by Thomistic philosophy. Miguel de Benavides, Salazar's companion, was also a Spanish Dominican friar who served as a third Archbishop of Manila. He is also known to be the founder of the Pontifical University of Santo Tomas. Benavides was known to help Christianize the Chinese in the Philippines, without forced conversion, of course. He actively fought the injustices and human rights violations committed against the natives by encomenderos, Spanish settlers in the islands, and the authorities, and advocated for a peaceful means in evangelizing the natives. He joined Domingo de Salazar in 1591 in returning to Spain for the purpose of bringing the moral and social questions on the evangelization and colonization of the Philippine Islands. It was noted in various literatures that Benavides governed the Archdiocese of Manila for only 3 years, proving himself to be a virtuous, pious, and zealous pastor, traveling on foot through the forests of the far-flung territories of his jurisdiction, always wearing his Dominican habit. He distributed his modest income to the poor and showed a special solicitude for the fishermen whose causes he advocated passionately. Another mirroring of the principles of Thomism and of the Salamanca school. Benavides was also an expert in Chinese language. He helped publish the Chinese version of the Doctrina Christiana, the first book published in the Philippines, which I've shown you a while ago. The Chinese version was published in 1593. He was also a writer. He wrote various disputations, articles, and one of those is this: La Instrucción para el Gobierno de las Filipinas y de cómo los han de regir y gobernar aquella gente. In this writing, he maintained that missionaries should only rely on God and the power of His word in evangelizing. Missionaries should set aside the use of force to impose the Christian faith. Third, they are not supposed to impose tributes to the natives, and they should refrain from waging wars against the natives. So again, a reflection of the Salamanca school of thought at a time when colonialism and wars, imperial expansion were the trends. It was clear not that Benavides and Salazar were contradicting their time. In his other works, he admonished Spanish authorities for subjecting the natives to forced labor in mines and farmlands, adding that the Spanish and other people in the island should also be working too. He reminded public officials at the time, especially the Governor General, about their moral duties to the people that they are governing. And he even criticized them for their illegal transactions and corruption. So now, what are the legacies of the Salamanca School as reflected in Salazar and Benavides? Well, they have shown the earliest examples of the fight for human rights in both theory and practice, during the Christianization of the East. What they have shown are clear praxis of faith and embodiments of the Gospels, serving God by serving others. Because we should take note that faith alone does not save. With the examples of Salazar and Benavides, the words became concrete actions and even brought Salamanca to the ends of the world, specifically here in the Philippine Islands. It also served as prototypes. Their actions served as prototypes of contemporary Dominican advocates of human rights. For example, Albert Nolan, Pierre Claverie, Gustavo Gutierrez Merino, and of course, the Philippines' very own Pedro Salgado OP. Pedro Salgado OP was a known advocate of the rights of the farmers here in the Philippines. And all the other contemporary Dominican advocates, they fought for interreligious dialogue, for the rights of the indigenous peoples, even for the rights of the migrants. So we can see clearly that starting from Salamanca, the notion of social justice and human rights evolved through time, but addressed the same things. Issues change, new issues emerge, names of people change, but actually the narrative almost remains the same. The actions of Salazar and Benavides as apostles of Salamanca and adherents of Thomism became inspirations for the establishment of the Dominican family for justice, peace, and care for creation. In the Dominican missions, these two groups under the Dominican order caters to the needs of the marginalized, disenfranchised, and neglected sectors in society. They are actually very active, especially now in this time of pandemic. They went to far-flung areas, to far-flung provinces and islands, just to bring not only the word of God, but also the basic needs of the people. They brought service to places where the government lacks, actually. Their examples also led to the formation of a strong community development and advocacy arms of various Dominican institutions. And to mention one, the University of Santo Tomas Simbahayan Community Development Office. When we say Simbahayan, it's Simbahan, Tahanan, and Bayan. Simbahan, Tahanan, at Bayan. Simbahan meaning church, Tahanan meaning home, Bayan meaning the nation. So this office is responsible to various advocacy programs, community development projects, livelihood programs, even during times of calamities. They organize themselves, they call for volunteers, and distribute the needs of the people who were afflicted by various calamities. Their examples also led to the Dominican Order Salamanca process, which became the embodiment of their agenda for actualizing the social teachings of the church. And it even led them to have a representation in the United Nations. To show you an example, on August 23, 2019, the Dominican Order's promoter then of the Advocacy on Justice, Peace, and Care Procreation, or JPCC, and also the representative to the United Nations, Father Michael Gibbs, visited UST, or the University of Santo Tomas. He came to have a dialogue about the status of the university's adherents to the Salamanca process in uplifting the poor and the marginalized, and to take of ways to support theology professors and community development workers in improving their mission. So here is Father Gibbs and Father Chong, the Vice Rector for Religious Affairs of the University of Santo Tomas. Thomism obviously has been a magnanimous influence to the order of preachers succeeding generations after Aquinas. The Salamanca School, which produced the great Dominicans like Francisco de Vitoria, who became the father of international law, and Bartolome de las Casas, who championed the welfare of the Indians in the Americas, was heavily reliant on Aquinas' writings on the human person and the relational principles of love and justice. The Dominicans in the Philippines, specifically Salazar and Benavides, inherited this tradition of championing social justice and human rights, being products of Salamanca themselves, at a time when these concepts are not favorite topics of discussion and when slavery was a norm. Aquinas wrote about justice as rendering to another his right, and echoed Isidore of Seville, who wrote in his Etymology that one is just if he respects others' rights. Salazar, who headed the newly established Diocese of Manila, later elevated to an archdiocese, was known to be an advocate of the natives' rights, convoking the Synod of Manila in 1582, resulting in the correction of the practices in encomiendas, recommended punishments by both state and the church for those guilty of abuse. In his old age, as I have mentioned a while ago, he traveled to Spain along with Benavides to bring the cause of the natives directly to the monarch. True enough to Aquinas' dictum, prius vita quam doctrina, they practiced what they preached and walked the talk. The Dominican missionaries exhibited social awareness and gave support to widows and food to the prisoners. Their acts were so exemplary that the mission in the Philippines became the springboard to the Japanese mission, where many Dominicans suffered martyrdom, most notable being the 1636 mission, which included the late faithful Saint Lorenzo Ruiz, the very first Filipino saint. It is certain that the beatific vision was attained with these noble exploits. Thomism, which is rooted in the theological tradition of Thomas Aquinas, presented a philosophy highly dependent on the doctrines of the Church about God and man, the latter being an offshoot of the divine's benevolent undertaking of creation. Aquinas gave his own mark on the Church's teachings by utilizing the emergent Aristotelian thought to prove in the first place the same Church's doctrines, thus strengthening the points of faith. Manifestations of social justice in his teachings were rooted on the fact that man's efficient and final cause is God, who imparted to man bits of his character to dignify man. It is therefore fitting to treat each individual with due respect and justice, for in some ways we are alter Christus, for we are created in God's image and likeness. In order to continue the mission of fighting for social justice and human rights, I would like to present these different recommendations. There is a need to educate people about the past, especially this part of our history of colonialism in the Philippines. It's not always a dark part of history, as clearly shown by the exploits of Salazar and Benavides. We need a more obvious inclusion of these episodes of Philippine history and the history of the Church in our lessons. There is a need for a special subject in the formation of Dominican identity in Dominican educational institutions. There is also a need for a stronger emphasis in both theory and practice of the social teachings of the Church, with open discussions on specific social encyclicals from high school to college. There is a need, obviously, to include not only in theology classes, but also in the realm of humanities and social sciences, the issues of social teachings of the Church. We should also emphasize the undeniable role of the Church in nation building, a beautiful aspect of our colonial past. There is also a need for a continuous assessment of and adjustment of social justice and human rights advocacies to be in tune with the call of the times. Because we must always ensure that the fight for social justice and human rights must be rooted on the Gospels and should always be timeless and timely. There is also a need for us to produce the new Salazars, Benavides, and Salgados that will face the challenges of the 21st century. There is also a call for both lay people and parts of the clergy to participate in this, especially in this time when there are so many issues about human rights violations, racism, lawless killings, especially here in the Philippines. And we must remember, all of us baptized, we are the Church. The Church is not only pertaining to the clergy, but also to the lay persons. We are the Church. So it is our duty, it is both our right and duty to participate in the narrative of fighting for social justice and human rights rooted on the Gospels, inspired by the Salamanca School and Thomistic philosophy. So I would like to show you my sources. So I end my presentation with this, and I thank all of you for this opportunity to present the narrative of fighting for human rights and social justice during the 16th century. led by Salazar and Benavides here in the Philippines, inspired by the Salamanca School and Thomistic philosophy. God bless all of you.